Um, Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Howden. I'm the Director of the Climate Change Institute at ANU, and welcome to the next ANU Below Zero Emissions Consultation Workshop. So today we're covering finance, investment and purchasing. Before we start today's discussion, we'll just play a very short video from Paul Duldig, the Chief Operating Officer of ANU.
Hi, I'm Paul Duldig, Chief Operating Officer at the Australian National University. I'd like to welcome you to the ANU Below Zero consultation. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land where I am today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. As we are all too aware, after the unprecedented bushfires, air pollution and heat that affected much of our east coast last summer, and with fire now wreaking havoc up and down the west coast of the US, climate change is already having devastating impacts all over the world. As a world leader in many areas of climate and energy research, ANU hosts over 450 climate and energy researchers and runs over 130 climate and energy related courses across the university. Our research and education programs are leading the way in developing solutions to the challenges that climate change presents. As the National University, ANU has also a responsibility to lead the nation in line with the world's best practice on greenhouse gas emissions reduction. However, at the moment, ANU activities are contributing to climate change through the direct and indirect emission of significant quantities of greenhouse gases. Further to this, simply reducing our emissions to net zero is no longer enough to maintain a safe and stable climate. To keep global temperature rises to well below 2 degrees Celsius, and if possible to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we'll also need to draw down and store or use greenhouse gases. In February, the ANU Council passed a resolution recognising the urgency of action required to address climate change. They also committed us to reducing the university's greenhouse gas footprint to below zero through its own operations. The resulting ANU Below Zero initiative is a vital strategic priority for ANU. It is a strong demonstration of our integrity, our emphasis on societal transformation, and our commitment to excellence in everything we do. With the university's extremely difficult financial situation, this consultation process is taking place at a very challenging time. Despite the stress that ANU is under, I'm proud that we are not shying away from developing this initiative. After all, we'll be dealing with the impacts of climate change long after COVID has passed. But there's no doubt that COVID-19 and our financial situation makes the operating environment for this initiative more difficult. Transitioning the university to below zero emissions is no small task. We'll need to look at every aspect of the way that we operate. We'll need to reconsider everything from how we integrate greenhouse gas implications into our decision-making, to how we use energy, how we travel, what we buy, and what we eat. That's why I'm calling on all of you to engage with this vital mission. Here at ANU, we have an incredible brains trust. I encourage all of you to contribute your ideas based on your personal perspectives, as well as your research and professional expertise, to help us transition to become a below zero emissions university as rapidly as possible. I look forward to your contributions soon. Thank you.
And thank you, Paul, in absentia. Before we start with the discussion, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on who we're meeting today, we're all meeting today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and their emerging leaders. I'm in Canberra on Ngunnawal territory, and I extend that respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples on all of the places that we stand today. This workshop is being recorded and will be shared. So if you don't want your comments recorded, please submit them anonymously in the chat or by email to the Below Zero email that's available. Just a little bit of background. In February, the ANU Council passed a resolution to act on climate change more significantly, calling for urgent action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from ANU. This was supported by the Vice-Chancellor and also the Chancellor in public statements where we committed to going not only to net zero, but to below zero in terms of our ANU emissions. that's consistent with what the science says is needed in terms of keeping temperatures down to 1.5 degrees or at least well below 2 degrees. So these consultations stem from that process and that commitment, and they're an opportunity for us to actually have a discussion about the ANU that we want and our leadership role in terms of the nation and globally. So these consultation processes, of which this is the second last one, will go until the 20th of October. The next one later this week is with on leadership with Paul Duldig and the Vice-Chancellor speaking. So you can contribute to this consultation in two ways. One is by engaging in these discussions, but also you can contribute by submitting your ideas on the Idea Note platform, and you should have links to that. So you can just use your ANU sign-on to get onto that. So the instructions for that will be in the chat window. The chat window also contains other links that will be put up there to make sure that you can contribute effectively to this discussion. So today, what we're going to be covering, we're going to be talking about opportunities for finance, investment and purchasing to contribute to Below Zero at ANU. We have three speakers today because unfortunately one of our speakers, James Dickinson Hoyle, sorry, is not well and can't join us today. But the other speakers will speak for about 5 minutes as a thought-provoking sort of discussion, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. So keep, please, your ideas and comments brief so everyone can have time to contribute theirs, and use the raise hand function in due course by clicking on the participants tab and then waiting for me to call your name. So we've got the three speakers. The first of them is Professor Frank Jotzo. Secondly, we've got Bella Himmelreich, who's a student here. And thirdly, we've got Mark Egan, who's the ANU Procurement Officer. So our first speaker is Professor Frank Jotzo. He's from the Crawford School of Public Policy and also runs the climate economics. Actually, I've forgotten the exact name of it, Frank, but you can introduce that. And he's focusing on mechanisms for financing emission reduction activities at ANU. Over to you, Frank.
Yeah, thanks very much. Centre for Climate and Energy Policy, we call our little endeavour here.
Sorry.
Oh, no problem. Look, I'll just, I thought I'd share some thoughts on how we can do better, actually, on purchasing and investments that will help us to get towards net zero, and in most cases also help the ANU save money. And there's a few specific things that could be adjusted to achieve that outcome. But first of all, let me jump to the Ideas Bank, right? Which is actually a really tremendous thing. And here it is. So that's that page on the Ideas Bank. Let me just point to a few of the comments that have been made up there. Lots of really interesting thoughts here. Just to point to this one, Matt Stocks, colleague over at engineering, is saying trading capital against operating expenditure, and I'll come back to that kind of idea, how to go about creating structures that allow us to overcome short-term budget constraints. Here's an idea by Jen McMillan, analyzing spending patterns, right? And identifying what are actually the largest energy-related impacts of procurement activities. And that, of course, goes to the stock take. And this initiative has already done a lot of stock taking. There's probably more that can be done at the finer grain in terms of energy efficiency. Here's one by Daniel Shaddock on earmarking ANU parking fees to invest in solar panels. And so that's actually, that type of suggestion recurs a lot on the Ideas Bank and comes up a lot in personal conversations that I have. A desire for concrete actions, even if they're not very large ones, that undoubtedly take us in the right direction, right? And that make a concrete difference in a sort of day-to-day level. It's a real desire, I think, in our ANU community for things that that have us directly involved in taking this in the right direction. Right, and then one by Jody Gatfield on campus building infrastructure, right? Solar, hot water, wind turbines are suggested, that kind of thing. I'll come back to that in my remaining remarks. So first of all, what are the opportunities that we have? Well, buildings are by far the biggest direct impact that we have in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, both investments in new buildings and how we run our buildings. Second largest impact by and large is travel for work, which of course now really doesn't happen, but you know, that will to an extent resume in coming years, as well as commuting to campus. So let's focus mostly on the buildings aspect. So what can we do? Well, not a lot of new build will be going on for the next few years, but nevertheless, what is being built new, what is being repaired, what is being refurbished, what is being upgraded, should accord to a really high level of energy efficiency. That will usually save money over the lifetime of a building, oftentimes a lot of money. Australian building standards fall far short even of the cost of optimal build in general, and certainly fall short of what you would see under proper kind of net zero or below zero outcome. Solar photovoltaic, solar cells on roofs, usually financially beneficial or roughly on par with the kind of relatively cheap electricity supply that ANU can procure. And a really important signaling device, right? So we know from our research that solar will play a really huge role in Australia's energy supply. We know that solar on rooftops, you know, in large organizations in particular makes sense. So ANU should be doing that, right? And so that should happen. Also for non-building investments, really, we should be buying according to really high efficiency standards, appliances, any cars that ANU buys and owns, computing equipment, that kind of thing. Now, financing. So a common problem in organizations' investment decisions is that kind of irrationally high discount rates are applied to energy efficiency relevant investments. In other words, the required rates of return, financial returns, are higher for energy efficiency investments than the interest rates that we pay on loans, right? And so that is, you know, you can look it up in the energy efficiency and investment literature. That's really a very common thing, and there's every reason to suspect that occasionally, or quite often actually, we do that at ANU as well. And so, really, what should happen is the calculation as to when to go for higher energy efficiency should use the same interest rate that we use on paying off the loans. Okay, so if we did that, we would generally go for much better energy efficiency standards. Now, of course, right now the budget is in a very unusual situation with some extremely tight and some red lines in the budget that constrain cash availability. Right. So how do you circumvent the problem of a short-term cash constraint, so that the short-term cash constraint doesn't get you in a situation of making bad long-term decisions? Well, you take things off budget, right? And so, there are opportunities, there are ways of going about it where, for example, you create an off-budget financial entity that then leases, that owns the asset, for example, solar panels on roofs, and leases it back to ANU. Right, and so that's certainly worth exploring if it is necessary to overcome short-term cash flow constraints. Now, Brian, of course, recently noted that the below zero emission strategy is an opportunity for ANU to save money, right? And so that's actually the clearest expression of those opportunities. So I'll finish with just some thoughts on management structures and incentives for energy savings, and that goes largely to operational efficiency. So when I look around the places on campus that I tend to work in, I see lots and lots of unused opportunities for saving energy and just for saving money, Perfect example is heating and air conditioning, right? Lots of buildings, including the one I work in, where public spaces that are barely used, that in some cases are practically not used at all at the moment, are heated as soon as the temperature is below 18 degrees and cooled as soon as the temperature is above 22 or something like that. That by and large is madness. We shouldn't be doing this. And the question is, what's going wrong? Why aren't we doing this? And again, the problems are typical for large organizations. It's problems of awareness, of incentives, and structures that allow better outcomes to be realized. And so some ideas how to help us get there are more transparency on energy use and energy costs, right? So maybe, you know, the monthly energy bill in comparison to other buildings and in comparison to last year should be on the dashboard of school managers and should be on the dashboards of school directors. We'll need to make sure that local areas actually reap the financial benefits from energy savings that can be made. We need procedures, I think, to prioritize requests for adjustments in building operation. And I think one could argue for targets for energy use reductions, so year-on-year percentage reductions that could be set for different buildings on campus. Okay, so thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Frank, for such a wide-ranging commentary and lots of really good things in there. So next speaker, we've got Bella. So that's Bella Himmelreich, who's an ANU undergrad student. Welcome, Bella.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name's Bella. I'm a student at the ANU studying environmental science. And I'm also a former organiser with Fossil-Free Universities, which is a national campaign to divest universities from their fossil fuel investments, and as part of that, a former member of the local chapter, Fossil-Free ANU. So yeah, thank you for having me as part of today's Below Zero Emissions workshop. It's really fantastic to see the ANU Climate Institute, in addition to already producing so much cutting edge climate research, also really taking on what potential we as an institution have to tackle the threat of a changing climate. So I guess my focus today is on ANU's conduct regarding their investments. So for those unfamiliar with the term, divestment is the act of stopping investments in industries that cause social harm in order to stigmatise or take away the social licence of those industries to operate. So we can witness the power of divestment movements throughout history. It was a key pillar of ending apartheid in South Africa when public institutions would take money away from companies that were working with the South African government. And in more recent years, fossil fuel divestment has aimed to limit the power of the fossil fuel lobby by changing the perception of using coal, oil and gas from being a necessary part of producing energy to instead being a group of reckless and rogue companies who are pushing our emissions to unsafe levels. So globally at the moment, 1,244 institutions have divested fully their investments from coal, oil and gas, which means $14 trillion have been taken out of the fossil fuel industry. And that includes the likes of Cambridge University, Oxford, Yale, and even UNSW. So the ANU's current investment approach is quite different. It's aimed at lowering the carbon intensity of our emissions each year. So we don't invest in companies that gain more than 20% of their revenue from coal, tobacco or gambling, and we weight our investments 10% towards companies with a good environmental social governance rating. So what this approach does is allows ANU to maintain its fiduciary duty by being able to play ball in a pretty minerals heavy domestic stock exchange, and it also limits the risk it exposes itself to, with coal increasingly being about investment. It also allows ANU to decrease the number of tonnes of CO2 per $1 million spent, so part of this sort of overall reducing emissions goal. This approach does not, however, show leadership and courage in the face of the fossil fuel lobby and its influence on our energy system, our politics and our future. It is not a strategy that effectively limits the power of the fossil fuel lobby in any meaningful way, because despite our best efforts as individuals and as organisations, lowering our carbon emissions will not be enough alone to avert the climate crisis, while it is a fact that 100 companies, some of which we invest in, create 71% of emissions globally. So elsewhere, where the consensus is that the age of fossil fuels is over, ANU lowering their emissions ahead of the bell curve could be enough for it to be a leader. But in Australia, out of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're facing a gas-led industry recovery. For the 6th year in a row, we're waiting for the Adani coal mine to be built, which will produce as much emissions annually as Canada. And renewables investment is still really uncertain, with public policy changing the year that Australia is supposed to reach net zero emissions kind of every 3 years. So in Australia, it's actually still completely up to our public institutions, our councils, our churches, and most of all our higher education bodies to really lead the way. So even with the financial situations of the higher education sector at the moment, it is absolutely financially possible for ANU to preclude all coal, gas and oil investments from both our domestic and our international portfolios. And we're already a step ahead by having an already de-intensified carbon emissions in our portfolio. Universities with similar sized endowments in Australia have done it, and we can discuss perhaps later in the workshop the practical details of how to do this, particularly with having an external investment manager. But I really want to take the time today to stress that it's also morally imperative that the National University of Australia, with leading climate research, do everything it can to take away the social license of companies like Santos, like BHP, like Oil Search, like Woodside Petroleum, that are not moving to renewables, that continue to ignore their shareholder engagement and are developing new projects each year. So the purpose of the session today is to brainstorm ideas for how ANU can reduce its emissions, and particularly to get ideas from a broad range of the community, from students and staff, as to how ANU can lead on climate. And I just do want to say that divestment has been a compelling and popular suggestion put forward by the staff and student community for over 8 years now. And in 2014, a referendum was held on campus where 82% of students voted to divest. And in 2015, 450 academics from the ANU wrote an open letter to the management of ANU, which is the second largest divestment open letter in the world, suggesting that it was time. So I think in 2020, the decision should be clear. The ANU Council resolution resolved about the danger of inaction on climate. And my suggestion today is that as a university, our first public statement should be to announce that we are proud to not continue to support or profit from the companies that are threatening our safe climate. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bella, for those perspectives and that challenge which you've laid in front of us. And I'm sure a lot of us have our own views on this as well. Okay. And our last speaker is Mark Egan. I was thinking Ronald Reagan, but Mark Egan, who's the procurement officer for ANU, and so Mark has an oversight of many of the supply chains that provide ANU with the materials that we actually need to keep running. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. I'll just take a couple of seconds just to share my screen for everyone, and hopefully everyone is seeing that now. I get a thumbs up from someone. Excellent. Okay, well, yeah, thanks for the introduction. Mark Egan, I'm the Chief Procurement Officer for the university, sitting with the University Procurement and Contracts Office. Today I'm going to touch on sustainable procurement, green procurement from a policy perspective, so not necessarily from a individual initiatives that I see within the supply chain, but more from an overarching perspective about the university's policies and procedures and how that could support better purchasing within the university from a below zero carbon emissions perspective. So firstly, I'll start with what actually is sustainable procurement. So this is a definition. There is an international standard that was released a couple of years ago, ISO 20400. So it's the process of making purchasing decisions that meet the organisation or ANU's needs for goods and services in a way that benefits not only our organisation but society as a whole, whilst minimising its impact on the environment. So it's fundamentally not just looking at what you are purchasing and what you are using that for, it's looking at how that got to you, where has that been sourced from, but also the end of life costs in regards to that, and understanding the full supply chain that delivers that goods or services to you and the impacts that it has on the environment. So this, I like this little graphic. So this is, most of us consider, if you look at the right-hand side, the product use. So basically we want to buy widget one, and we are considering that component and what the cost is for me to purchase that particular component. When we're talking about a sustainable supply chain or a green procurement, we need to consider further the full breadth of the supply chain in our purchasing decisions. So that can be all the way from extraction, but it can also be to distribution, the impacts it has from transport to actually to get to us, the retail aspects, the warehousing aspects, and most importantly, what's the end of life for that particular product? What happens to it when I don't need to use it anymore? Does it go to landfill? Is there a reuse aspect? Are there other components to it? Can it be broken down and recycled? So, and the costs that are associated with all of those aspects. So knowing your supply chain is key. The first component really is waste reduction. So it's actually not purchasing in the first place. And this aligns very closely with, I suppose, the savings component that the ANU needs to have. And reduce, reuse and recycle are actually components and guiding principles of that. So reduce is fundamentally, do I need to purchase the piece of good that I am looking for at this point in time? Is there another way that I can get that particular product or service? Or do I actually have a need for it in the first place? Is it something I want versus something I actually need? Reuse is looking at, obviously, a better understanding of, is there the particular item somewhere else that I can borrow or purchase from, as opposed to purchasing new. And the university has a huge opportunity in this space in regards to understanding what we actually do own, which is a lot on our campus. And instead of going to supplier to find that good, it may be going to College X to find that particular good, as opposed to going externally. Recycle is obviously looking at the supplier. Is it ordering recycled goods or components of recycled goods, etc., as part of the purchase, as opposed to a brand new product. And considering the total cost of ownership, which I've said before, which is the full product as well as the end of life costs and everything that sits in between us. So the ongoing maintenance costs, the ongoing product cost, and the ongoing disposal cost at the end as part of the decision and the value for money proposal. Suppliers is the other key one from a procurement perspective. So it's not a vacuum, it's not us dictating. We need to work with suppliers that share our goals from an environmental perspective, and that potentially comes to a code of conduct in that space. An extremely challenging thing to do at the university, considering we have about 17,000 suppliers at the moment in any 1 year. So your ability to know the supply chain or to work effectively with 17,000 suppliers is obviously fundamentally flawed. So potentially we need to work with a smaller cohort of suppliers, with suppliers that share our particular goals and objectives in this space. Training and education is one where I see us uniquely qualified to assist in this space. So working with our suppliers, those smaller supply base that we do have, working with our suppliers on new sustainability initiatives, and the chance to put our academic and our commercial hat together. We spend a lot of money. We can connect the two and potentially drive initiatives that will potentially drive change in the marketplace as well. Opportunity to support the suppliers. So not everyone is going to be as advanced as, not all suppliers are going to be at the same level, but we can potentially help them in improving their own sustainability practices by then improving our own sustainability practices in that space as well. And visibility is key. I've already touched on the supply chain. That ongoing visibility, as well as ongoing reporting of the supply chain, any connected suppliers within there, helps us to necessarily report, but also helps us to drive better initiatives within the supply chain as well. Policies and procedures. So a 7-step procurement process is pretty much outlined at the top, but in this particular one has components of building sustainability into each one of the processes. So it starts at the scoping component of the particular procurement, all the way through to the actual evaluation of the procurement, the contract negotiations, the contract itself having particular performance targets in it, and then the ongoing management to make sure that those performance targets are actually being met. It requires it to be built throughout our procurement processes and our policies for it to be embedded across the organisation. It can't just be reliant on a handful or a central unit. Everyone that is purchasing, which is a lot of people within the university, needs to have these as components of their decision-making process. University of California is a pretty good example if you want to look it up in regards to the university model at the moment. They have already done this. They have specific plans and targets in place, as well as supporting policies that go along with those. Challenges. So the common challenges that you see from a supply chain perspective, or the common objectives you get, is obviously price. So Frank touched on this before, but the impression that environmental or sustainable costs more. And sometimes it does from an upfront cost perspective, but this comes to the assessment of the value for money being not just the purchase price, but the full life cycle of that, and comparing apples against apples, and that sometimes flips that value for money assessment on the products. Knowledge, it's about increasing people's knowledge. They're not familiar, they don't know how to do it. So again, embedding it in the processes helps in that space, and just continuing education in regards to better buying practices will assist in that area. Availability, so green products may have limited or specialist supply. So they may not come from the existing supply chain, they may come from different supply chains, they may have to come from different locations from where they come, and they may have longer lead times, for instance, than existing product lines. But I think that will change pretty rapidly in the future, but availability is a common pain point in this space. And then no alternatives. So at this point, there may not be an alternative for every single product or every single service that we have, but generating demand in that space and asking those questions, and potentially that academic to commercial conversation we talked about previously, driving demand will stimulate development within the market. And obviously stimulated development will then benefit ANU in this space, but potentially benefit the market and the country and globally as much as possible in the future. So that's all I had from a policy perspective, and I look forward to the consultation and the suggestions that come up from that.
Thanks, Mark. And that was really good, and it laid out the opportunity for ANU to take leadership in this procurement area as well as in other areas. And I think that's really important, and it's sort of great to hear that sort of comprehensive perspective from you. So we're just going to open up the floor for discussion. Just repeating, if you want to say something, raise your hand using a participants tab and just hit the raise the hand button. Keep your comments and ideas brief and be constructive. So we want to build on other people's suggestions rather than knocking them down. So enhancing things in particular. So we'll aim to sort of wrap this up on time. So for a 1 p.m. finish, and so possibly even a minute or two early, just so we have time for logging onto the staff announcement from the Vice Chancellor soon after. So in terms of people with hands up, so I think we've got Phil Taylor up first.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks to all the speakers. It was very interesting. I actually just have a couple of questions rather than any ideas. So I think my first question is the ANU below zero policy, I suppose, is that in any way funded by ANU, or is this something where we're supposed to come up with ideas that are either self-funded or things we can do for free or that sort of thing? And then secondly, so we've had this is the 6th workshop, I think now, and we've had lots of really good ideas for things we can do, sort of practical things. But if let's say we want to do all these things, where does the money come from? Because there's a lot of things that have been suggested, and it seems to me that it would be extremely expensive to actually implement everything that we want to do. I mean, just as an example, we've looked at getting solar panels up here at RSAA, and it would cost sort of $75,000 to $100,000. And that would pay itself back in 2.5 or 3 years, I think. But at the moment, there's no way the school, like I've spoken to the school manager and the school director, and of course there isn't that money sitting around for us to spend on that at this time. And so sort of on like this, I guess what I'm asking is, what are the practical ways that we, and indeed I, can go about actually getting money to implement these things that we want to do?
Okay. Thanks for that, Phil. So it's a really interesting question. It raises the dilemma of that we can't afford it, but we can't afford not to do it, and at the same time. And so how do we navigate that? And so obviously there's budgetary decisions which are being made at an ANU level right now. And we'll probably hear about some of that process immediately after this call with the Vice Chancellor. And I guess we're sort of engaging in those decisions in a way that will take below zero forward, but it's too early to say. I actually don't know how the cards are going to land on this. I'll get Claire to comment briefly on the evaluation side of the ideas that have come up, and then we'll throw it to the panel.
So just in terms of the ideas, we've got a sort of small panel for each of the themes who are going to be rating the ideas against a set of criteria, and then we'll produce a report on that. And we already have a sort of draft discussion paper on below zero. So the idea is that these ideas will be combined, and the draft discussion paper will turn into a strategy, and that ANU below zero strategy will go before the relevant sort of governing bodies within ANU and certainly be approved by the council, and then we'll start looking at implementation. So we're hoping that will go through early next year. And obviously there are things that will be done concurrently, but that if that's approved at an ANU council level, then that's a sort of stamp of authority to make it happen throughout the university.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Frank, you might want to just comment in terms of the strategic sort of priority setting here, because you raised a whole series of options within your talk that may be appropriate.
Yeah, Phil, I think, you know, what you mentioned, the example of possible solar panel installations that might have a payback period of 3 years, but cannot be accommodated in any existing budget allocation, right? That sort of goes straight to the heart of the problem, in particular with this sort of COVID-induced budget crunch, right? And so, you know, I would say, look, I'm an academic and not involved in these sort of, management decisions around these things. Really only say that the usual solution to a problem like that is to take it off budget, right? And so hand it to, for example, an external organization that owns the assets and leases them back to ANU, right? Problem solved, basically, right? Because you're going to be paying less, you hope, right, for the service that you're leasing, right, than you would not making that investment, right? But, you know, be conscious that, whichever organization will be owning and leasing back will also be making a handsome profit, right? So in that sense, it's the second best, but, you know, still better than kind of not making the investment, right? And then when you think more creatively, you can, of course, take things off the budget while still owning them, right? So you could have an ANU entity owning a thing that's not on the recurrent ANU budget, right? I mean, that's what government, that's how the NBN, for example, is organized federally, right? I mean, that's a massive investment that federal government didn't want to have sitting there on its budget, so you make it a state-owned enterprise, right? The trouble is, of course, in some sense, we're actually talking relatively small amounts of money. You would normally, I guess, do this when you're building a new complex of apartment buildings for students or whatever, right? You wouldn't necessarily do it for a few $100,000 of solar panels or energy efficiency retrofits. And so, yeah, that's really all I'd say on that.
Thanks, Frank. Bella and Mark, you got a comment on this question?
Yeah, I've got a comment. So one observation would be is there's a big opportunity within the existing money the university needs to spend. So the university spends a lot of money, and it's more in the mindset of what products are actually purchased with that money to potentially drive change as well. Yes, there are some projects that require individual funding, such as solar, etc., but there's a large opportunity just with the purchasing that the university already does, just changing the mindset in regards to what it is that we're purchasing and potentially what the decision, the deciding factor is before purchasing X product or making that decision as opposed to the supplier. So there's that opportunity. The other one I'd say in regards to solar, and it's probably a question for Frank in this regards if he has anything, is it better for the university to explore individually on campus, such as solar on all the buildings, or working such as a power purchase agreement with suppliers to fund a much bigger project that's already using it's the expenditure the university is going to spend anyway, but that is being used as capital for a much larger project with other large scale buyers as well.
Yeah, look, I don't want to take too much airtime, but yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, large scale renewable energy will generally be more cost effective than small scale, right? At the same time, of course, you know, there is a strong case for medium scale, like you might have on some of our larger buildings, like supermarket roofs, you know, Bunnings roof, that kind of thing, because the demand profile accords relatively well with the supply profile from solar, right? So that you know, we don't, residentially you have a morning and an evening peak, right? In a work setting, you have a midday peak, right, which accords well with solar. So there's your argument for local investment. But I would also actually not underestimate the symbolic effect, right? So if the economics of it is not really either here or there, right, between investing in a solar park out west, right, versus on ANU roofs, then I do think there is a strong case for investing in ANU roof solar, just simply to make it visible, right? It's not going to cost us any extra money, then do it to send a signal. Yeah. My view.
Thanks, Frank. And the other perspective on this, if you know, if to use your words, it's got a 2 to 3 year payback period. I mean, there's no other place you can put your money that gives you a return on investment, and that comes to that sort of idea of we can't afford not to do it, in a sense, just like we can't afford not to reduce our emissions much more broadly. And so there is this sort of a hurdle, a barrier in front of us, a very short-term barrier, and we need to find creative ways of overcoming that. And Frank's comment about the symbolic sort of element, you know, being seen to be doing something is I think, actually quite important as well. Bella, have you got anything brief to say on this before we move to the next question?
Not really. I think, yeah, Frank's exactly right. And I think there are definitely, yeah, symbolic actions that the university can take to signal their direction on this going forward, even if it's going to take a couple of years for the budget to fall in line with it. So that's what I'm excited for out of these sessions.
Fantastic, thank you. So next question comes from Gottfried Otting.
Thanks for running the workshop. I work at the Research School of Chemistry, and there we have an annual invoice for our utilities of $1 million. And I was gobsmacked when I learned that we don't actually pay this anymore, because as part of the COVID recovery plan, utilities are paid off the top of the budget before the budget is handed to the schools. So we have lost all incentives to save energy, which is strange in the current situation. And to me, that smacks of hypocrisy from the council, actually, that introduced those rules. So I tried to figure out why that happened, and I didn't get an answer. They said, well, yes, incentives are important, but we don't have the bandwidth to deal with this. I think that doesn't make sense. $1 million is equivalent to 8 positions. There is something at the ANU that is not right.
Okay, so it's more of a statement than a question, but I'll open it up to the panel to comment on.
I'd just simply like to emphasize that view and that argument, right? I mean, we want to be chasing cost efficiencies everywhere, and you know, it's crazy not to use energy efficiency opportunities, and it's also self-evident or obvious that there's lots of unused energy efficiency opportunities, and just we need to be on this. And I'm not sure that there's too many positions in our organizations that really have that as their mission, right? My observation, casual observation, is that that sort of falls between the cracks a little bit, right? The units that would benefit from the financial savings, right, are typically just simply unfamiliar with energy efficiency issues, right? And the areas of the organization that understand energy efficiency opportunities don't have a financial incentive in implementing them, right? And this is a very, like I said before, right? This is something you see across the corporate world, actually, right? This kind of misalignment of roles and incentives.
Thanks, Frank. And that's to some extent why we've tried to develop a comprehensive approach, both in this consultation and more broadly with Below Zero. Bella or Mark?
I don't have a comment on the budgeting process, or the decision-making process. I suppose what I will say in regards to energy usage, and it comes to Frank's point about building utilisation, something I'm quite experienced in from a previous life, but coming to the overall tenets of reduce and reuse. So there's a lot of impact to be made just by better decision making about how we use our current resources or how we use our buildings, especially now that we have a mixture of on campus and off campus, and potentially for an extended period of time, and maybe that behavioural shift becomes reasonably permanent. There's a very big opportunity to reduce our energy savings as one example within our building utilisation if we have the right systems in place to actually do it and look at our utilisation of our buildings at a more strategic level, which again, we don't have to spend large amounts of money to do it. It's just actually reducing the cost that or the impact that we have.
Thanks, Mark.
I don't really have anything to
Okay.
Radio.
The next question from Lawrence McIntosh.
Hi, thanks so much. Look, it's a bit of a question, a bit of almost a spruik, so I apologise if that's not super appropriate. But look, I'm from SolarShare Canberra. I'm actually from the ANU as well. And look, last year we raised actually over $2.4 million from local community members in Canberra to fund solar. So it just sort of struck me on Phil's point regarding finding external sources of financing. Look, if that's something, Phil or others, that you want to have a serious conversation about, that'd be, I think, very easy for us to talk about. Our whole organisational mission really is to help organisations have, I guess, a connection between the energy that they're consuming, the way that it is sourced, and the ownership of, in this case, solar assets. So, yeah, is there a particular point of contact that'd be worth us as SolarShare engaging further with at the ANU regarding external third-party funding for those kind of things?
Thanks, Lawrence. We are aware of SolarShare, and you're quite right. There's a whole bunch of people at the ANU who've been investors in that, and akin to Frank's comment before, that there's sort of a spectrum of possibilities in terms of financing energy efficiency and renewable energy production related to ANU. The sort of option you raise is definitely one of those elements on that spectrum that we've identified. We're just not quite yet in a position to move on this because we need to go through the current expenditure recovery, ANU recovery process, and develop a strategy for below zero, and this is part of developing that strategy. So yes, it is on the agenda, but we're not quite there yet. Frank, Mark, Bella, comments there?
No, not on.
But thanks, Lawrence, for the sort of comment and question. The next question from Kat.
Thanks everyone for your great perspectives. I just had two questions. One, I think primarily directed at Mark, and the other at Bella. In regards to ANU supply chain, I'm just kind of wondering what the resources are for supplier relationship management from the ANU side. I'm wondering if there's a gap between training that might need to occur on the ANU level in when we engage with our 17,000 different suppliers, and whether that would help embed a more sustainable approach into ANU operations. And my other question for Bella, I think it was quite a timely talk you gave, particularly on getting an external investment manager to help ANU divest. And I'm just wondering if that was put forward at the broader ANU consultation process when the Vice Chancellor asked for perspectives and ideas on how to save money, because I imagine that no investment manager worth their salt would encourage bad fiscal decisions, and that seems to meet both ANU's goals on keeping financially steady and the below zero initiative in divesting.
Thanks, Kat. Okay, we'll throw it to Mark for the first one, and then to Bella.
Yeah, sure. So supply relationship management is a very good point, Kat. So the university runs a decentralised procurement model at the moment. So the responsibility for the management of the contract sits with the end user. So that's usually within the colleges and the portfolios in that regards. And there is no, there's a contract management handbook, but there is really no specific skill set for contract management or specific roles for contract management within the university, apart from one or two in this space. So is that an area for improvement? 100% it is. And it's potentially part of the discussion that's going on at the moment about what's our service delivery model within the university, because contract management, there's obviously the environmental that we're talking about today, but also just the contract performance and savings to come out of that, and better management of the contracts that the university does actually have in place.
Thanks, Mark. And Bella.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kat. I should have been clearer. ANU has an external investment manager. They've been around 2015. Because the history is a little bit funny that the Chancellor in 2014 actually did partially divest from 7 fossil fuel companies that were kind of the worst polluters and the worst climate deniers of the lot. And it was decided the next year that that wasn't a strategic approach at the time, in part due to a lot of political backlash. And so they appointed an external investment manager that then reinvested in most of those fossil fuel companies. So I think it's kind of a bit of a toss-up, right? That you have these investment managers who are experts, and it would be a really great thing for ANU to do to continue to use it to save money. But also it's quite hard to find an investment manager that isn't acting, that kind of doesn't treat all of their clients as similar corporate entities. And there's sort of a balance for public institutions that have a strong philosophy behind their investments to find an investment manager that is properly suited and able to kind of adjust and try more experimental things like divestment. And they're much more thinking of universities as corporate institutions. So I think it's kind of up to often the universities or the public institutions themselves to do internal work, developing a framework about what they want to invest in, and then taking that to an external manager to make sure they're getting the best, return on investment. But at the moment, kind of template investments from external managers don't really do the job of helping these institutions kind of show leadership in the way they want to. It would be interesting to look at Future Super's approach of how they invest, and also UNSW earlier this year, because they're both kind of similar sized to us and are managing to get really good returns.
May I respond to that, please?
Sure, Mary. Yep.
Now, I'm sorry I missed your presentation, Bella. I was involved in another meeting. As the director of the investment office, it's important to realize that while Bella has quoted the history very accurately, the university has made incredible steps towards reducing its carbon intensity of its investment portfolio. It is a very unique opportunity the university has before it to move down this route. However, it is not quite as simple as what Bella has portrayed. The costs involved in active management of domestic Australian equities that will beat the benchmark on a consistent basis and reflect the socially responsible investing principles of the university will take the current costs of running that same portfolio from just under $500,000 to well over $2 million. The current cost is 14 basis points for the portfolio. We would expect that portfolio to cost upwards of 60 basis points. That's just one portfolio. And that's not the entire LTIP. While it's great to move down these routes and say broadband, there are opportunities there. They definitely are. But they have to be reflected upon and thoroughly investigated. There are no easy solutions here.
Thanks, Mary. So, and I'm not fully across this, but I understand there is actually a divestment working group across ANU, and you're the chair of that. Frank Jotzo.
It's not a divestment work group.
Oh, sorry, okay.
Socially responsible investing working group to reflect upon the policy and put forth the next generation of implementation standards for that policy.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I stand corrected. So Frank is also on that group, and so Frank, you might also want to respond, but we'll also give Bella a chance to respond as well. Perhaps Frank first.
Yeah, that's right. And look, I certainly don't want to comment on the ongoing process of recommendations on ANU's sustainable investment policy that's going on. But just to say, you know, there is an ongoing process, and that's a really very positive thing, I think. And it has, of course, arisen out of, you know, an effort, I think about 2 years ago or so, that the Vice Chancellor himself at the time drove forward in terms of, you know, taking next steps in terms of the evolution of the ANU policy for, you know, which as Bella explained before, is a model of accelerated decarbonization of the portfolio. And so that's ongoing. And of course, Bella, you were involved in that public forum here at the time. So over to you, I guess.
Thanks, Frank. And yeah, as many of you can tell, Mary and I have hashed out this discussion quite a few times. I think I just want to close on saying that it's definitely, you know, a really ambitious thing to do. And some people say that it's, you know, near impossible to fully divest in a rapid basis. I definitely don't know the details of the investments and don't have, you know, better economics or financial management than the ANU investment team. But I can say that tackling climate change, just at the end of the day, it's going to take doing impossible things. And I think we can all kind of grapple with that on a national, on an international level. And then when we look at our own institutions, we often get bogged down in the details. I think we can see that beside us, other Australian universities, our councils, our churches, and our communities are doing everything they can. And I want to make sure that ANU can make the same commitment. So it's fantastic to hear about decarbonizing our investments and doing all these things that sound really great. I'm just, I guess, saying that we need to consistently raise the bar to meet the levels that we're going to need for a safe climate in the future.
Thanks, Bella. And clearly this is going to be an ongoing conversation that we have. And I guess the sort of overarching sort of element here is the decisions by the ANU Council and the Vice Chancellor and Chancellor to head down this pathway of a very effective climate response and a leadership role of ANU. And for me, that's a critical framing sort of element that should guide those conversations. So we've got perhaps just a room for one last question, if there's any sort of urgent questions for the panel. If there's no hands up, we'll aim to close that discussion today. But I'd actually like to thank everyone for engaging in this and in the previous below zero consultation processes. We've actually generated you know, a lot of great ideas, which we've talked about how we're going to take those before. I think the timeliness of this process is really good, but at the same time as challenging because of the budgetary situation of the university. So you know, globally, there is a push towards, you know, engaging in discussions and actions in relation to a green recovery post-COVID, and ANU needs to constructively engage in that, both in terms of its internal actions, but also in terms of external engagement and advice that we can give to others. So for me, this has been a really nice part of the broader jigsaw of how to move forward with ANU, and I particularly appreciate, Mark, your engagement on this, because I think procurement is one of those almost like hidden, invisible aspects of the whole process, but crucial in terms of getting good global outcomes. Thank you, Bella, for your views on divestment and the sort of way in which you've injected yourself both challenging but respectfully into the process, and I appreciate that. And you know, that's the spirit in which I think, you know, we can engage constructively together to reach good goals, which actually meet multiple criteria. And thanks, Frank, for your ongoing engagement in Below Zero and the experience and wisdom you bring to the discussions here at ANU. And thanks, of course, to the audience, and particularly to Claire, Juliet and Lamise for organising this. And just noting lastly that we've got one more workshop in this consultation series, which is the Leaderships and Targets workshop with the COO, the Vice Chancellor and myself speaking, as well as a student rep. That's on Thursday at midday. Thank you very much. Cheers.